All right, it looks like we are live. Welcome everybody, my name is Scott Maier. This is Drawing Together with Artist Network. So it's Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. We meet every week. Episode, 92? Can't believe it's been this many already. So I want to welcome everybody. Thank you for joining me again. This is what we're working on today. I got this cool old photo of this cabin, kind of focusing on perspective, texture. It's a fairly simple architectural structure here, which can allow us to really focus on getting the main perspective correct. And once we have that, we can kind of play freely within that structure to kind of focus on that really awesome texture of the old wood and the shingles there. So if you're following along, you can find that reference image that's below me here. You can find that in the description, so you can just bring that up and on a nice digital screen, and you can follow along with me, or if you want to print it out. Many of you like to watch and then follow along later, and you're going to find also in that description a link to the page, the episode page, where you can share your work when you're done. You can also find that pinned to the chat at the top there. So welcome everybody. So many familiar names here. I love seeing everybody's work. So many great drawings of the portrait and the ram, the last two drawings. Some amazing work. So thank you all for submitting those, and especially to you, those of you who are very open about the things that you're struggling with in the drawings. So that's really what these episodes are all about. It's about getting together to draw. It's about perfect practice, not perfect drawing. So what we're working with today is it's just charcoal drawing. So I've got this. It's a bamboo paper made by Hanamula. I really like it for working with charcoal. But if you have really any surface that's suitable for charcoal and you want to follow along with that medium, go ahead. If you want to follow along with graphite, I think a lot of these techniques that I'll be working with today are going to be applicable. So use whatever medium you feel most kind of drawn to at this point. The pun was intended there. Let's see what I'll be working with today. I've got vine charcoal. I've got a couple compressed charcoal sticks. What do I have? I've got the 2B and the 4B. My 6Bs are kind of running, they're a little short right now, so I'm using the 4B. I don't really need to get super dark with this, so I think the 4B is going to be just fine. So that's kind of a medium weight charcoal. I've got my blending stump. I love using this. This is going to be really helpful with the texture. So if you are working with graphite, this will be helpful as well. I've got a rubber eraser. You can see I like this retractable one that Derwent makes, and I have it kind of cut down into this wedge so I get this nice sharp edge. And I have a kneaded eraser to clean up kind of broad areas. What else do I have? I've got this strip of heavyweight paper that I'll be using as a straight edge to mask certain areas, and just to help with areas like this here. And a paper towel that I've got to help wipe things down. So as you know, those of you who have been with me, I like to really kind of build up the drawing, wipe it down, build it up, wipe it down. It helps to unify the whole drawing as we go. So let's get to it. If you are new, you know, my kind of approach to drawing is the idea that we're constantly refining the gesture. So I'll be using my vine charcoal to kind of establish some rough lines here, kind of reacting to the overall form and starting to think through the subject. And I'm trying not to think too think too much early on. This is really about reacting to it, kind of getting my head focused on drawing, and recognizing that the drawing process itself reflects and kind of parallels the evolution of my thoughts as I'm observing the subject. So I'm using the drawing process to better understand the subject, and as I understand the subject, then the drawing will come together. But sometimes it can feel like we have to know in our heads before we even touch the paper with the material what it is we're looking at. But that's often not really realistic. You know, it takes time to really understand a subject, and I think, you know, drawing is really the best tool for that. So again, we're using a drawing process that that parallels our own thoughts, really. So I'd like to think that marks are thoughts, and that as we create drawings and paintings, we are kind of getting in touch with that whole process of looking and seeing, being with the subject. And so at this point, what I'm looking at is that I have my eyes blurred, and I'm trying to just connect with major forms in a very quick way. I think it's helpful at this stage to kind of think abstractly about the subject. And so what that means is that rather than thinking of these marks as wood, as grass, as logs and shingles, I'm thinking about these marks as shapes of light and dark, and simply kind of reacting to it. So I'm moving my eyes back and forth quickly between the reference image. So I have the reference image set up to the left here on the screen in front of me. I've got the reference image, and then I've got the overhead projection from the camera above me here. And so I can see the two of them side by side, and I'm also looking at the drawing on the table in front of me, as well as the reference image. And so kind of utilizing all those. And again, I think speed is really an essential tool here, because the faster you work, the more it inhibits that desire to get precise early on. Now, I have the advantage of having drawn this subject in advance of the live stream here, so I might be able to arrive at the correct perspective a little bit faster. But so just kind of keep that in mind as you're working, that it's an evolution, and as you continue to draw, as you improve your hand-eye coordination, you'll be able to arrive at the correct perspective more quickly. And so with this initial attempt here with the vine charcoal, one of the things I'm also thinking about is placing the cabin correctly on the page. I want to make sure it all fits, right? And so these early passes aren't about being correct. So I see lots of areas that are off, but that's kind of the point of the gesture. It's about getting marks on the page, so then I have something very specific that I can kind of react to. And so I can say, if this angle is off, I can see specifically by how much. I'm comparing the subject to the drawing and making changes based on both the observations of the subject as well as the reference. So just getting something on the page, again, it kind of gets me warmed up. It gets something on the page to which I can react. And another thing, if you have any questions, feel free to type them out in all caps. Any questions, observations, just random thoughts about drawing. I love to see an active chat here, and I'm going to do my best to answer any questions that you may have, but you all are really great at helping me through that and answering questions. Again, this is all about building a community of artists, and we all kind of work with each other to kind of navigate the whole drawing process. So now that I have this kind of ghostly image here, I can start to make some specific adjustments. And I think what I want to do right now is kind of switch my thinking to the negative space, so the shape of the space around the cabin. And I've started to indicate some basic value relationships here, so kind of darkening that background. But I need to start to become more precise now. And what that means is I need to start comparing various elements to one another. So that's a process called comparative measuring. So you can look at the height of the main structure to the height of the roof. You can compare it to its width, and you can compare those proportions to the negative space, the shape of the landscape around it. And this is something that it's going to be consistent throughout the entire drawing. So you always want to be double checking those proportions. And again, it's all about comparing one thing to the other, comparing elements within the subject to other aspects in that subject, as well as the subject to your drawing. So drawing is really about making those connections, and you know, it's a way, of course, to make an image. But to me, I think the real power in drawing is that it gives us a glimpse into the artist's mind as they're trying to understand the world. So we've got a subject here that we're trying to understand, and we're using that drawing process to better understand the subject, and then as a result we have evidence of that whole thought process. So so really kind of embrace the sense of discovery in your drawing. You know, we're discovering how the materials work, we're discovering how this how the structure is made, and really how it all leads to the creation of a picture. Okay, that's a lot of talking, so I need to focus a little bit. So getting to the topic of correcting now. Let's see, this right here I think is going to be a key angle. So getting this slope and then that change to that porch, that overhang. And I think the best way to do that is to use some angle sighting. So I'm going to close one eye. It kind of flattens my depth perception. Again, I have the reference in front of me here, just off to the left. Closing one eye, I'm going to use this pencil as a guide, aligning it with the angle of this roof line on the reference. And then I can bring that over and I can compare it to the angle in the drawing. So again, I have my drawing on the right side, I've got my reference on the left. I'm locking my wrist, aligning it with that angle, bringing it across right on top of the drawing, and I can make some quick adjustments there. And when you're working with an angle, focus first on the path, and then we'll determine its length afterward. So don't worry about starting and ending at the right spot. Let those marks run long. You want to get the angles correct first. One of the things I noticed right away too is that with this left side of the structure, it's slightly angled. It's not perfectly vertical, and that kind of gives it the character of the building. So I want to kind of capture that. I don't want it to be perfectly vertical there. So now from this, we have a very specific point where those two lines intersect. And I have one of the choices I can make right now is to let this part be flexible, or that become an anchor from which I make other evaluations. I think at this point I need it to be flexible because I don't have quite enough of an understanding of the subject. So I need to give myself a little bit more information. And so right now, like placing this line, I have the option of moving it up or down along this angle. So if I've locked my wrist and I've determined that angle, I then have to determine the height along this. And at first, I'm just going to make a rough estimate. I'm going to go with what feels right. And then as that starts to come together, I will then make it more specific. And I think it's going to be helpful to try to think in terms of mass as well as line. One of the things I get into trouble with sometimes with perspective drawing is that I focus so much on drawing lines for the edges of the objects that then it becomes difficult to remove those later. So I can see right now, for example, that that's a very heavy line. So I'm going to knock that down a little bit. And maybe start to kind of build up some mass here along that edge. And if you're kind of confused by those terms, you know, really when you look at nature, there are no lines around objects. Lines are symbols that we've invented to represent the edge of three-dimensional objects, and it's a very powerful human instinct to draw a line to represent an edge. We don't even think about it, really. It's just a natural instinct. And the but as you use the drawing process, as you really get into it, and you start to study the world around you, you realize that those lines don't exist. So when we're talking about the difference between building a form through mass and shape versus line, what we're doing is we're thinking about creating edges in two different ways. So for example, right along here, I can create an edge by simply darkening up to an imaginary line there. And that creates an edge through mass or shape, or we can draw a line that represents that edge. And if you're going for realism, if your objective is to create a drawing that looks realistic, then you want to start to get rid of those lines as much as possible. Now, having said that, as an artist, you're also in control of how you balance those two. So maybe you do a drawing that is purely line, or maybe you do a drawing that's purely shape, or you do something in between, because lines can be very powerful, and they can express more than just, you know, a description of an edge of an object. It can also carry a lot of information about, you know, what we're thinking about the subject. So I'm just using this angle sighting process first. So you heard me mention, you know, perspective, that's going to be a focus here. But for me, the process of drawing in perspective begins with angle sighting. So you may have learned tools for, like, for example, one point perspective, 2-point perspective. So all those linear perspective tools. I like to utilize those tools, but I like to bring them in after I've established the structure using angle sighting. And so I'm kind of going by gut here, so I may have to adjust these lines. Once I've established that angle, I can move it left or right to find the correct proportion. So I need to keep an open mind that those proportions may not be correct. But if I use my gut to begin with, it kind of generally gets me in, you know, close, and then it's very minor movements left or right to correct from there. Manju's Imperfect Sketchbook, I just made a comment kind of reiterating what I was just saying about the lines. So that's awesome that you're just kind of thinking along the same lines as we were just talking about here. Yeah, lines are really kind of fascinating. And I find it really fascinating too, is if you go back to some of the earliest examples of art, you know, the cave paintings and Lascaux, for example, there are lines being used to represent those edges. And so it shows you how powerful that can be. And I think it's great that we have those tools available to us. All right, so now that I have a basic structure established, I need to establish this right side here. But I want to start to adjust everything. I don't really need that line right now. What I need to do is evaluate the width to the height. What do I want to do? All right, so I'm going to use some comparative measuring here. So I'm going to take this distance from the left edge to this to the right edge here, this front corner, and then I'm going to compare it to the height, and I'm also going to compare it to the width here. So if I close one eye, again, it flattens my depth perception. Actually, I'll just use my left hand to do it. I'm aligning this edge with this part of the reference photo, sliding my thumb down the length of the pencil so that it aligns with this right edge as I place it on top of the reference. And that gives me a basic unit. And if I keep that locked and I keep my arm locked and I rotate it, then I can compare that to the height. And what I see is that it's essentially a square. Now it's in perspective, so that tells me that actually that building is perhaps a little bit deeper than it is tall here. But I can take this measurement, turn it vertically, and that should essentially give me the correct proportions here. And there's this really nice dark gap here that helps to close off that form. And now I can take that same measurement and I can compare it to this horizontal distance across here. And what I notice is that this measurement here, if I carry it across, that distance puts me at the edge of the door. So I can start to indicate that. And then there's a bit more. And it looks like it's essentially a half of a unit. So if I take this as 1 unit, carry across, it puts me to the edge of the door, and then from here across about halfway gives me the edge of the building there. And now if I run a line vertically through here, a plumb line, I can see where it intersects the roof as we go through. And so then I can compare that to what I'm observing in the reference. If I hold my pencil vertically, closing one eye again, it seems to run right through there properly. So to the right of the chimney, and it just clips this corner here. So I'm feeling more confident about the proportions now. And you can see how messy the page is. I'm not worried about protecting anything. I can erase that out, clean it up. But I think it can sometimes be a distraction to try to preserve the white of the page too early. This is an exercise. This is a study. And I think it's helpful, at least for me, to get messy with it. All right. So now what I can do is I'm going to actually, since I know where the right side of the door is, I want to determine its width. So I'm going to use a plumb line to do that. So I'm going to visualize a line that runs from the left side of the door all the way up through and to see where it intersects the top edge of the roof. I'm just somewhere right around here. And as I'm doing that, I can see that there's some, you can see some light passing. It's clear through the building here, but I'm not going to worry about that yet. That's a bit early. It's a bit of a detail that I can save till later. And then there are these posts holding up that porch roof that I'm just trying to, I'm going to start to visualize here. But I'm not going to really draw them in. I'll kind of show you how I deal with those a little bit later. And I'm still using the vine charcoal, so I know this is all going to be fairly temporary, but I'm firming up the structure in my mind more than anything, so that if I end up losing this drawing, I can get back to an accurate perspective and proportion more quickly because I've already gone through that process. So I've got those kind of loaded in my mind right now. All right, so I'm feeling pretty good about this. One thing I don't like in the reference image is you can see that grass line here where it shifts to the dark in the forest. That line intersects right here at this bend in the roof. And it creates a bit of a tangent, so it brings that background forward because they're converging at this intersection of all these lines. And so what do I want to do here? If I were on location right now, if I were actually observing this in real life, what I would do is I would actually either scooch down a little bit or stand up a little bit taller to try to adjust that so that I have a clear overlap. But I think what I want to do right now is actually, since it's in the photograph, I'm going to follow that. Sometimes things are just imperfect, and rather than fudge it for the purposes of making a better drawing, I'm going to just go with it and see where the landscape leads me. Now I'm starting to think about that play between light and dark here. So we have this alternating sequence of a lighter background, darker, light, and then dark again. And then this side here becomes light, and we start to see it, that it's very subtle, the difference between the grass there, the value here, and the value of the roof. And I think as an abstract form, that's kind of interesting the way we kind of connect these forms together. So I'm not going to kind of artificially make this darker. And then I'm going to kind of start to maybe kind of transition through here. So then it creates this light path through here, broken up by these dark areas, which I think is kind of interesting. All right, hello everybody. I see some new names here, so welcome if you are new. I see somebody from Kentucky, Jane from England. Hello everybody. We get people from all over the world here. So if you're new, shout out. Let us know where you're viewing from. I'm just going to kind of knock this down a little bit using my paper towel. As I said, this is vine charcoal, so it's fairly light. But now that I've gone through that process of kind of thinking through the perspective and the proportions, I think I can move to I'll use the 2B pencil. It's a little bit harder charcoal, and I think a majority of the drawing is going to be handled with this. So welcome everybody, and if you are new, feel free to ask any questions as you go, either to me or anybody in the community. This is all about kind of sharing our ideas of drawing, and also feel free to point out any sort of errors or things, any observations about my work. I welcome all of those observations. Everybody here is generally really respectful about that, and I like to see where I'm off. So if you say, hey, check the roof line again or something like that, it helps me to kind of go back and correct that. So in that way, we're all kind of working together to create the drawing. So again, that's what this is all about. What do I want to do now? As I observe this, something doesn't feel right. Now, this is an important part of drawing in perspective. So as the drawing starts to take form, as it becomes more three-dimensional, you'll start to interpret the subject differently. So when it's those initial marks, they're generally more two-dimensional, and as the form starts to come together, we start to see this as a three-dimensional object, and it becomes more apparent when something is off. And so I like to really kind of get in touch with that, especially with regards to perspective. And so I like to really evaluate these primary angles to see does it feel correct or does it feel wonky? Something feels a little bit off in this relationship here. Now, and it could just be that the drawing hasn't resolved itself enough, it hasn't come together enough, or it could be that something in those major angles. So I'm going to double check that. I'm going to take an angle sighting measurement of this angle. And I do see that it's a little bit too steep. And so let me actually use the eraser to kind of adjust that. So it was a bit too vertical. And now I'm going to compare the right side of the reference. And that feels more correct. So it's very subtle, but it makes a big difference. Now using the compressed charcoal, I can make more precise marks. One of the things that you want to be careful of is, as you can see, I was drawing really with the wrist and kind of pulling my fingers like this, and that's going to naturally create a curve. So you kind of have to get practiced at drawing from the arm a bit more, and so it would actually be, it's better for me to lock the wrist and then draw from the shoulder and the elbow more. So it's really these 1, 2, 3 lines that are going to be critical, and then 4, 5, 6, 7. Those are going to be really essential for this, and then that 8th one is that back edge. So I'm feeling pretty confident about these angles here. And I'll clean up any overruns of those lines. Let me double check that roof line. It feels a little bit steep here, so I'm going to level this out. And there's a lot of lines that are accumulating together here. But again, we'll kind of clean that up, and we're going to always be evaluating. All right, let's see. Hello, everybody. Elise is asking, how do I get such a sharp point on the pencils? So I use a razor blade to sharpen these. And then if you're using an overhand grip, you can see that it's really laying the pencil down on its side. And that continually sharpens the pencil as well. So that makes a nice sharp point for when I really need it. But for most of the drawing, I don't need a very sharp edge. So I'm not all that worried about it. And so what I'll do is kind of shift. Sometimes if I do need a sharp edge, I'll shift to a broad area like this to kind of clear my head a little bit, and also sharpen the pencil. And as you do it, just as you kind of do a large wash like this, allow the pencil to roll in your fingers so that it's not creating any flat spots on the core of the pencil. All right. Uncle Dan, slope and grade of roof. If you have any kind of questions, if you have more specific comments about that, just let me know if there's something that seems off. So far, it seems to be generally correct, but you need to always be double checking, always comparing subject to the drawing, and then elements within the subject to each other. Now, one thing that I haven't really done yet is I haven't really evaluated the placement of the peak of the roof. So what I need to do is kind of really kind of clean up this edge along in here and establish a sharper edge along in here so that I have a distinct structure along this wall. Now, if that peak of the roof is perfectly centered above this, above this section here, if it's perfectly centered, one way to find that is to establish what's called perspective center. So if I have this wall drawn in perspective, by connecting the opposing corners, kind of creating a cross like that, that intersection point represents the center of the wall as drawn in perspective. So then you can draw a vertical line from here and generally it's pretty close, but let me see if the reference really, it looks like based on the reference that that peak is actually shifted off a little bit from center. So that peak might actually be over on this side a bit more. So I'm going to keep evaluating that. So what might have to happen is that I think actually this roof line here comes over a little bit. And everything gets shifted over. So this is where now this strip of paper can come in handy. So rather than drawing a line there, I can place that along the edge that I want. Actually, I'm going to do some quick comparative measuring or angle sighting here. I gotta remember to lock my wrist because there was a bit of a movement there. So that feels like it's correct. We're pretty close to it. And then I can race along that edge. To create that. And that's starting to feel a little bit more correct, and now I can start to see that there's a sense of volume being established here. And now what I'm doing is I'm taking this angle here from this corner of the overhang to that bend. And that would put that overhang somewhere right around here. And I can establish that edge. All right, just like that. Rather than drawing along that edge, I'll actually run these horizontally up to that edge and kind of mask that off a little bit. And that helps to create kind of a sharper edge. Now that feels like it's running a bit long, so let me double check that. And it is a little bit, so then I can come back in and clean that up a little. So in that way, I'm kind of building it from a combination of using line as well as shape. Let's see. Jane Newble, the line between the roofs seems to go up a bit in the drawing, whereas it seems horizontal in the photo. Oh, right here, yeah. So let me double, that's a good point. That's where I messed up in my preparatory drawing. I kind of adjusted that. You'll actually see in the thumbnail that that's off a bit. And so let me double check this. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to evaluate whether it actually is horizontal, because it does feel relatively horizontal in the reference, but it's got just a slight angle to it. And it is, like, I can see that this is a bit exaggerated here, so it needs to become a bit more horizontal. Thank you for pointing that out. And we talked a bit about this in the last episode too, is there are, we can sometimes become aware of things that we're consistently having to correct in our drawings. And so it's interesting to see that. So that's the exact same thing I had to correct in my preparatory drawing. Again, my brain just kind of went through the same process to arrive at the same result. And it's kind of one of the fascinating things to become aware of is where we're consistently off. So that's starting to feel a little bit better. Here's the other thing that's happening too, is I'm getting stuck between observing the projection from the camera in front of me that's vertical and this one from real life. And I've found that I've been relying on this a little bit more, and it's a bit off. So I need to be using that vertical one. So your comment, Jane, really helped me to come back to the vertical, the overhead. So, and that's something that you might consider as well as you're all working, is set up your drawing vertically and step away from it to help become aware of those things. Sometimes we just get locked into this angle from which we're working, and it can throw things off. I'm just going to shore up that angle a little bit. And now at this point, very minor shifts to the perspective can make a big difference in the drawing. Actually, I'm going to mask this off and compare this angle. Yeah, and I feel like I was off by quite a bit on this roof line. That's a bit better, okay. But that's what the drawing process is all about. I love it. I love seeing drawings that have corrections evident in them. And again, it shows kind of the evolution of the artist's understanding of the subject. So don't be afraid to let some of those mistakes, and I call them mistakes, but those are kind of early decisions. Don't be afraid to let them show on your drawing. It becomes evidence of the thinking mind behind the artwork. So yeah, that makes a big difference there. Now what I want to do is evaluate this distance here. So I'm going to take that measurement of here and compare it to the height of the roof. Because that seems a little bit off. I'm going to take that. It's actually pretty darn close. Now, I see in the reference image of the thumbnail that's right below me, it's cropping off a little bit of the top. So if you're bringing up the full screen reference image that you'll find the link in the description, you'll see that there's a bit more space up here. And so that's kind of throwing me off a little bit. So I'm using the bigger reference rather than that thumbnail. Actually, I might be able to, let me see if I can adjust that real quick. There we go. That should be better. That way you're seeing it a little bit better. So I think what I need to do is actually come down just a touch. So the edge of the roof is going to be somewhere right around here. And again, what I'm looking for is that relationship, the vertical relationship between the porch here, that's at a steeper angle, a flatter angle, to this height here. So if I'm going to take it from here, carry up, compare that to the reference. And actually I'm going to compare this as well. Yeah, I think this needs to come down a bit. How are we doing on time? We're about an hour, or about 45 minutes into this drawing. And these generally run about 2 hours, so if you're new and you're kind of curious, most of these episodes run about 2 hours, and try to get it done within that time. And if I use this eraser, there's a little bit of light that catches across here, but so I'm going to overstate that a little bit. And the way those roof lines intersect, they come in together like something like that. And so I don't have that correct at this point. So I need to make some adjustments. What do I need to do here? I'm going to darken that. And then what that would do is actually bring this over here. So they're all interrelated. So I need to, as I make changes to one aspect of the drawing, I need to necessarily change other things as well. Let's see how that works. How is that? How's that angle? Needs to be a little bit steeper. See, we're making a mess. That's all right. There we go. How's that feel? I think I might need to adjust this a little bit now. Kind of sharpen this up. So we're starting to move into the ugly duckling phase of this. And if you're new, it's a term we use here frequently in this show to describe the stage that many drawings go through as you're trying to understand the subject better. You know, it's very common for the drawing to move through an ugly duckling stage where you feel like it's just all going to fall apart, and you're like, oh no, is this actually going to work? But if you power through it, you know, sometimes it doesn't come together, but you'll end up with a deeper understanding of the subject if you just keep powering through it rather than try to then kind of give up. It's hard to see what's really happening in here because of that darker background. All right, now let's see. I think I need to bring a bit more emphasis to this part of the roof. Is that feeling better? I feel like that's starting to get there, but again, that's what the process of drawing was. We're understanding the subject. See if that major form is generally there. Ursula, you'll be drawing from this session, from the recording later. Awesome. Wilma is saying, thank you for the tip to mount one's reference photo in a vertical alignment in order to properly see the shapes. Yes. Yeah, because our brain is constantly calibrating and adjusting to things. So if we're orienting ourselves to the subject and the reference at an angle, it can sometimes throw things off. And then you pull it up and you step back from it, and you may realize that everything is a little bit wonky because we've been compensating for that perspective there. And then Patricia is saying the roof appears to be a bit wider in the reference than you have in your drawing. So I think you're talking about this distance here. That's possible. Let me double check that. So if I take this, yeah, I do believe you are correct. So what do I need to do here? I think what I want to do is I just kind of adjusted this. I think I need to move this over a little bit. And then bring this line over. See how that works. It's a very subtle and very minor adjustment here, but it could make a big difference in how we interpret the subject. So I'm going to use this again as that base unit, compare it to the width, and that seems to align a bit better with what I'm observing in the reference. How's that feel? Yeah, I think that's all right. Getting better, getting closer. So thank you, Patricia. Thank you for pointing that out. Hello, Hassie. All right, and Wilma's saying, yeah, that I'm talking about tilting the vertical, you're drawing vertically, so thank you for reinforcing that. And let's see, and then Cecilia is saying, what about the overhang of the roof? Yeah, so we'll be, if you're talking about this here, we'll be representing that in a little bit, I think. I've got to kind of clean this whole thing up, but this right here is going to be kind of a critical aspect of representing that overhang. See if we get those main lines first. You know, you can see that this is starting to get to wear down, and if I need to sharpen it, I can move to a section like this and arrive at a kind of a sharper point. Use some cross hatching here to change the direction up as we go. And I think this is where having it taped down is kind of a pain. So I wish I could rotate everything, but it makes it difficult for the camera to move things around. So I'll have to try to contort myself a little bit. So I want to be careful here, and I want to start to think through the direction of my marks a little bit. So if I'm working on this dark section here and I parallel with this roof line, what that's going to do is it's going to pop that dark section forward. Your brain's going to look at it and say those marks are running in the same direction, so they must belong together, so it brings them all together. When in reality, those are two different planes, and so I want to treat them as such. So I'm going to run my marks on one plane in a different direction than the angle of that roof, and I'm not worried about protecting that edge. Because I can always go back in and sharpen that up with the eraser. And it's the same with this one here. So I can start to build up some values here, and I can reestablish that edge. But by running these marks in alignment with the perspective of that plane, then it's going to help to really kind of create that sense of perspective. So I want these marks to run parallel with that perspective of this plane, not this way, if that makes sense. Because again, if my marks run parallel to this plane here, your brain is going to say they must belong together since they're running in the same direction. And we don't want that. And if you're not really sure about what direction to run your marks, use kind of circular marks that are more omnidirectional. You know, the other aspect to this plane, so it's got the perspective lines that lead off in this direction, but it's also got a vertical orientation, so you can also run them vertically. You just want to be careful not to run them parallel to that roof line. So I'm just kind of building up some value here. I'm going to smooth things out a little bit using the palm of my hand, and then we'll sharpen up those edges a little bit. So we are kind of building up major forms right now, and the idea that if we get these major forms correct, then all that detail will come in more quickly and support that form. If we get to the detail before we've established that form, then all that detail tends to float to the surface and flatten things out. So let's get that those major forms working, so then we can map the texture properly to that form. All right. So here we have I was just talking about being careful not to run the marks parallel with that roof line. Those are two different. This is in a different place of space than this. But I'm not quite sure what to do. So what I'll do is I'll run these marks horizontally here to contrast that largely horizontal, that slightly angled edge there. Let's see, Uncle Dan is saying, do you use Derwent or Prismacolor charcoal or graphite pencils? I do use a lot of Derwent. This is actually a General's pencil. I really like the General's charcoal. I do like the Derwent as well, though, and I've used them quite a bit. I do like Prismacolor, especially the ebony pencils, but I also like the Derwent Onyx pencils. Those are awesome, and we'll be working with those. So I try to shift things up a bit in these episodes. So doing some charcoal, some graphite. All right, so I'm feeling pretty confident about these overall forms. This is kind of getting in the way, so I'm going to unify everything, soften everything, and then pull out the, pull out the lights with the eraser later on. There's a bit of a halo along this edge that's distracting me, so I'm going to kind of think through that. It sometimes can be helpful to identify areas that require less thought that you can kind of escape to as you're drawing. So back in here, you see that I keep coming back to this area. That's largely so that I can give my brain a bit of a break before I move back to some of these areas that are going to be more detailed. And this is a bit of a distraction here. We're kind of building it up, wiping it down, building it up, wiping it down, again, to create a sense of unification in the drawing. If we create hard lines in the drawing and then kind of fill that in, it does take a bit of work there to make sure everything feels like it belongs together. But we've talked about that before, so if you're new, what we're talking about is balancing variety and unity. So if we think about those concepts, unification is about the idea that everything feels like it belongs together. Variety is the contrast. The greater the difference, the greater the variety. If there's more stuff happening in your drawing, it gets more exciting because you have more variety, but you also run the risk of losing that sense of unification, the idea that all of them belong together. So as artists, we're constantly confronting that, that dynamic, contrasting variety and unity and finding a balance there. And for some of you, you might prefer to have greater unity, some of you might prefer to have greater variety, but again, being aware of that for yourself can be really helpful. And so when I wipe everything down, that's starting to unify everything. So it brings everything together, and then I need to create more contrast to separate those forms. When you're starting with a line drawing, you're kind of starting up from a sense of division. There's a lot of variety there. And then the work becomes to try to unify those together. This process starts from a sense of unity and then gradually breaks them apart, if that makes sense. Exotic Peanut Butter, welcome. That's a name I don't recognize before. I think it's an awesome handle you got there. Let's see. Okay, what do I want to do now? It's a bit of a break because I got to get into some heavier thinking now. All right, so what do I want to do? I think what I want to do is start essentially from the background forward, sharpening things up. So I can start to add some kind of detail here. I need more charcoal. So I'll show you, some of you have asked how I sharpen the pencils. This is how I do it. So I've got a razor blade, and just at a fairly steep angle, I'm just pushing with that razor blade to carve away that wood casing to expose the core. And one thing that you just want to be careful of is that sometimes that charcoal core is broken and it's kind of held together by a little bit of adhesive. That's what holds the wood casing to that core. And so you'll actually feel it as you transition from the wood to that charcoal. You'll feel that little grab on that adhesive. So you just want to be gentle there. And I'm just kind of gradually scraping, rotating as I go, because I want to make sure that adhesive doesn't stay on that edge. And I'm not going to make this too sharp. If you have a piece of sandpaper, that can be helpful as well to sand that down and get to a nice sharp point. But I don't really need that because I can again sharpen it on the paper. The paper's got enough of a tooth that it'll sharpen it. And I mostly just need more charcoal. All right, so I'm going to start with this kind of point of reference. So as I start to finish this side, let's see, I'm kind of in my way there. Let's see. I'm going to use the side of the pencil here to block in some major forms here, looking for these darker gaps in the wood. And you know, since I'm kind of locking in on that form, the form of that structure. So if I'm feeling pretty confident in that structure, then I can start to, I'm going to use that to place the place some of those boards there. I'll show you that in just a second. But right now, I kind of softened this edge so much that I lost. I need to have a clear point of reference in here. So I'm going to kind of sharpen up that edge. It's a bit bright, but that'll knock down. I need to sharpen up this edge as well. A little bit of light that catches on the edge of that roof. But I need kind of clearer points there. So what I was saying earlier is now I need to create those wood slats. So this becomes a point of reference. There's that major gap in there. Wrong pencil. So I want to establish that, and then I'll move down to the bottom and indicate that. I'll move to the top, and that's largely indicated. And then I can start to break that apart from there. So if I look at this stretch here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's about 6 dark bands. And so I don't know how precise I really need to be with this, but and this is really something that you can have control over. You know, again, you're going to be in kind of control of how precise you want to be. So if you really need to sit with this to make sure that you've mapped out these boards 100% accurately, then take your time with this. Or you may, maybe have the mindset that you want to kind of roughly suggest it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I think that's about right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So I've kind of established some of those darker bands there. And there are these 2 little kind of vents up in here that I'm going to lightly indicate. Switch to the blending stump now. And then use this to help establish the grain. So one of the things I'm thinking about as I do this is that texture. So utilizing the form, utilizing the material here to reinforce that texture there. So starting to think through the direction of the marks. And I've gone a little bit dark with this. I'm not getting I'm working on the darker areas. We're going to pull out the lights with the eraser here. I'll show you that in a little bit. I'm also thinking about the overall perspective. So if we've identified the perspective here along the center line, as we move up, there's these lines here roughly radiate out from a point off to the left here. So if we observe that we have an angle down here that's moving up towards the horizon line, up and away, it gradually becomes horizontal at the horizon line and then angles down like this. So I'm going to kind of exaggerate that motion here. But if you're roughly aware of that perspective, it can help you with the angles that you're using as you're establishing the texture here. So as we work from this line down to this, we're going to gradually change the angle of the marks. Because if I run my marks like this, for example, it's going to run contrary to that perspective, and it's going to create an uncomfortable feeling. Right? It's not going to be quite accurate. So, and so again, you can you can decide for yourself how precise you want to be with all of that. But if you have a general idea of what those angles need to be, that can be really helpful. So I'm going to stay focusing on some of those darker marks as I darken the underside of this. I don't like that there's kind of this halo here. So we have dark, a thin line, and then this darker band here. So I want to smooth that out a little bit. I want to transition that a bit more, because that halo is flattening things out. And then reestablish that. The light on the side, that's just catching on the lip of those shingles there. All right, just checking to see if there's any questions here. Uncle Dan, been working from my Audubon Birds coloring book. I'm a newbie, so your advice with shading will really help. Awesome, that's good to hear. Let's see, oh, Brenda, let's see. Oh, we have Bodhi Beamers asking, what kind of charcoal paper do you prefer? It's hard. I do like, Legion makes the Rives BFK. It's a cotton rag paper that I do like, although it tends to hold the charcoal a little bit more than I prefer. So I do like that. This is a Hanamula bamboo paper that I've really become, I don't know, I've been impressed by. I really like it. But it's not easy to find. So that's kind of the hard part with that. But then other than that, you know, there's a lot of charcoal paper out there that I like. But I do like the ones that are more like a rag paper, that have kind of a unique tooth to it, rather than kind of an imprinted surface. I'm just kind of sharpening up this edge. And I'm going to come back to this edge a little bit. So what I'm thinking about as I'm working on that is being selective with the details, and where I'm going to be more precise. So I'm going to kind of roughly establish the gaps in the wood here. And what's cool about these logs is that, you know, they're all kind of irregular, which they've got this really cool variation to them. Like this one's got this curve inward that is fascinating, so it gets a little bit shaded in there. And then we have that window. Where is that? So if we find the center of the window, it's not directly below the peak, because if you look at the structure here, this isn't placed directly above the center of this wall here. There's the way it's oriented, everything's kind of shifted back a little bit, and I believe the window is kind of placed in the center here. So if we were to cross the corners, that puts the window essentially right here, which is just off to the right of the peak. So I'm going to rough that in, see how that feels. Switch to that overhand grip. I like the lines. I don't know what the overhand grip makes. That angle is a bit too slanted, so I need to what I was doing is I was adjusting, kind of compensating for the perspective here. It's off by a little bit. And so as I'm making these lines, I'm letting that pencil roll in my fingers to break up that edge so it's not a hard line. If I switch to a mark like this and I draw like this, if I create a sharp, consistent mark, that's going to be an indication to the viewer that that's a hard edge, and I want to be careful with that because I don't want those lines to pop off the surface. If anything, again, I want to make sure that I have a sense of unification on that wall. And so we're looking for that balance between variety and unity here. And so did I, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 main boards that I've got here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm missing something somewhere. All right, here there should be 2 boards. So this one is kind of too wide. This has got to come down a little bit. Okay. Now here's where I'm going to use the eraser just with a really light touch at first. And then this line comes up a little bit. So starting with a really light touch, letting it blend more than anything, and then as I need to, create a little bit more pressure. Okay, so now I've got the correct number of lines, so they're roughly right, and what creates a sense of volume on those logs is the light that catches on that upper surface as it rounds around. It's actually got kind of a nice sharp angle. So you have light kind of striking on the top and then a shadow underneath. So we see that clearly here along this board. So pull out a little bit of light there. It's a bit too strong. And then along this bottom board here, you really see it across this the top of this board here. And then in the window sill there, the light's really catching it. So I'm kind of erasing out a larger mark than I need. But I'm going to cut that back out in a little bit. But you can see when we shift to that understanding of light and shadow, it makes a big difference. Now the boards here are slightly different. It looks like they're joined together differently. So that variation in lights and darks seems to follow more along the grain of the wood. And you get this cool knot up in here. So now that we have that basic perspective established, we can really start to have fun with the texture here. All right. Okay, I gotta take a little bit of a break though. Some sharp focus there. Yeah, Uncle Dan is saying, difficult perspective when you realize the old timers used double-bladed axes and a draw knife to try and mill those logs. I know, that's insane. You know, these hand tools that were used to create these buildings, so much character that is you see in this stuff. So I'm going to sharpen this edge just a little bit, but in the reference, that top edge is pretty subtle, so I'm not going to be super definitive with those marks. I think as I move across here, just going to mask that edge off. And then we have the chimney here, which is kind of a tricky thing. So I think I'll come back to that later as I'm starting to play around with that. Right now, I'm just kind of sharpening up the edge of the roof lines there. It's a horrible sound, I'm sorry. I'm kind of making myself cringe with this, so I can only imagine how that sounds when it's coming through the microphone there. So I kind of needed that because my eyes were starting to calibrate to the values after I had wiped it down and gotten rid of all that bright white. Then I started to kind of calibrate to that a little bit. All right, switch back to this. I just want to sharpen up this edge along in here. Another horrible noise. My apologies. Just kind of gently working with the eraser here to sharpen up the edge of that window. That's too square. So what do I need to do? Well, I think I need to come in there a little bit. There we go. Sorry, I'm being a little quiet here as I try to focus on that form of that window. I think I'll probably come back to that a little bit. So I'm working with the eraser here, just being really gentle with it to try to clean that up, but I don't need it to be super clean. Shouldn't be using my fingertips. It occurs to me, kind of lost the sharp point to this eraser, but there we go. Get that light back on the windowsill. It's a bit wide. And then I'm going to bring the light right in here across the top of that board. I can add a little bit of detail by bringing in the shadow from that board that's above it. And now what do I want to do? This, this board right in here feels a little bit too heavy, too dense. So I'm going to use my eraser and just kind of using the weight of the pencil, weight of the eraser, start to lift a little bit of that, and then bring in a little bit of some darker areas here. There's light showing through the cabin there that I can lift up with the eraser. There we go. That feels a little bit better. Oh, I got to get those little venti window things up there. It's a very technical architectural term. So how's everybody doing on your own drawings? The perspective working out for everybody? Deanne is saying, love that eraser. Yeah, these Derwent erasers are awesome. They're making a horrible noise, but that's user error, not the eraser itself. So this is still the 2B pencil that I'm working with. So I know I can go even darker, and I'll come back in to kind of push that tonal range a little bit more later. And I think I'm going to move to now the move to this wall here, and then come in with the roof last. But I kind of like what's happening. There's kind of a sense of atmosphere that's building in this drawing that kind of reinforces the age of the building, which is kind of interesting. So I may go with that a little bit. There are some areas. I'm just kind of, what I'm doing is I'm doing a pass through the drawing, making observations about areas that I want to address. Like this area here, just the mark making is troublesome to me. So I may have to come back to that because I don't really know what I want to do. So I'm kind of making a mental note there. Okay. Now as I move into this area here, I'm observing that the logs here really fall into shadow. I can't really see much of what's happening there. And I do like that there's a bit of light that catches on the the interlocking logs there. So I'm trying to think through where those marks are. And you can see those are really overstated because my eraser, I've kind of lost. I lost the definition there. It's no longer as sharp as I need it to be. That's okay. So I'm making kind of larger marks, but that I can cut back into. I can start to indicate the light on the logs down in here. Now what you notice is that because of the way they interlock, we have a highlight across here, across this board. The highlight across here is divided between these two logs. They kind of stack on one another, kind of like this. And so I am trying to become sensitive to that. And then as we move up here, we really lose any sight of those logs there. So as I said earlier, that I kind of overstated these marks, so now I can come back in and thin them out. What's happening here? And you might find it helpful to really sit with the structure here along this corner. I don't know how much I really want to get this dialed in, just for the sake of time here. But this may be an area that you decide that you want to kind of really study a bit more. It's really subtle in there, but it can make a big difference to try to get that right. So I want to suggest that for now, and I want to make sure that the suggestion doesn't feel off. It doesn't become distracting, at least. Let's see. All right. And so we have those posts that we're going to bring out a little bit later, but I think for now I want to really just focus on that on this wall here, and then we're going to actually we're going to build everything in layers. Got to double check the perspective, make sure everything is feeling all right. I got to reestablish that door, but right now I'm going to focus on those logs. And I have to sharpen up that end there. Zephy is saying, still challenging myself using ink pen. That seems really tough for this. It's such a permanent medium. Yeah, that's a tough one. So way to go. So I'm really happy to hear that you're going for it. Again, how's everybody else doing? Feeling good about your work? Any troublesome spots that we might all be able to help with? All right, so now I solved the placement of the door before. I'm going to have to do that again. So there's some light peeking through that open door. I'm going to actually use that to kind of build the door from. And this is this big dark area inside the door. It's a great one to switch to that overhand grip to help sharpen the pencil so you have a fine point when you need it. And again, I'm kind of trying to be aware of the fact that I haven't really pushed the tonal range in this yet. Because I know I can go darker with the 4B pencil. So I'm just kind of saving that for last. To see how far I can get with this. Again, to help create a sense of unity with all the marks, and then just bring in those darks later with the 4B. Let's see, there's the boards across here. This area is still kind of pretty loose and undefined, so I'm going to have to sharpen up that edge in a little bit. And I think the way I'm going to do that is kind of mask this. So if that's the edge, and I can use the eraser to bring that out. But I'm not going to try not to be too heavy-handed with the eraser. There we go. And it kind of sharpens that edge up a little bit. And I do want to spend a little bit of time on this bottom edge along in here. And because of the angle of the ground there's a roll to the ground that corner kind of gets obscured. And I think that's an important element to become aware of to help anchor everything to the ground. All right, so I'm kind of established that post. I haven't resolved where the base of it should be yet, though. So I'm letting those marks run a little long. And now what I want to do is I want to make sure I place these posts properly. So I'm giving some light vertical marks. And so what I'm evaluating is that I'm seeing where it projects from that corner, looking at the distance then to the door, and that feels generally right. Now I place the middle one. So I've got the two outer ones, and I've got the middle one, and I'm looking at where it is relative to the corner of the building. And then with regards to perspective, it should feel like the spacing is correct. Now because they're kind of receding away from us, it shouldn't be evenly spaced. You know, if we were looking directly flat on at it with no perspective applied, then these would generally be evenly spaced. But because there's perspective, this is going to be a little bit wider here than over here. And I want to evaluate that using comparative measuring. So this distance here should be slightly greater than that distance there with this post. And so we've generally got that. And then if you've got the correct perspective, then what you should be aware of is the idea that they're actually evenly spaced. So this is the trick of perspective: is there's the optical truth of the subject, what it looks like based on your optics, where your point of view, the perspective, etc. There's that truth, and then there's the literal truth. So the literal truth is that these are evenly spaced in the building, but optically, given our place in space relative to these forms, it's a little bit wider here than it is here. And so then I've got a rough indication of those marks, and what we see is that the post here on the right is dark against that lighter background, and then these here are lighter against that darker background. So I can use my eraser to kind of lift that out a bit. And I'm going to let that fall into shadow here. Just let it merge out of the shadows there. And I'll let those marks run long, because again, I haven't resolved the base of those yet. One of the things that can be helpful if you need to make a vertical line, you can see how I have my pinky anchored here on the drawing, and I'm using that as a guide, or you can use the edge of the paper as a guide, kind of locking the wrist and then just scoring down along the paper. And now I want to figure out where the base is. So I'll use my angle sighting, and this here is essentially an extension of that wall. So if we're given perspective, then the base of that would be somewhere right along here if we were to extend that line out. And then if we establish an angle that's consistent with perspective along that other plane, and actually that worked out pretty well right about here. So I'm going to visualize that angle and then just drop a little mark there. And actually this is kind of light against that darker background. And the light catches that stone that's underneath it, that's supporting supporting that post. I feel like I need a little bit more contrast here. So what I'm going to do is darken this. This is all in shadow underneath the overhang. So I'll bring that down in value. And then reestablish this. All right, so how's everybody doing? We're cruising along. We're about an hour and a half in, 30 more minutes. I think we should be good to go. I'm feeling pretty confident in the overall perspective here. So what do I want to do? I think I want to switch to the chimney now and kind of work my way forward, and then we're going to finish it with the kind of the darkest darks. And now I'm also kind of thinking ahead for other future things. And I do like the sense of atmosphere, kind of the age that's being conveyed through this, the fact that it's not all sharply in focus. But I do feel like I do need to bring some of it into a sharper focus to really pull the eye in a bit more. So I think what I'm going to do is, what gets tricky here with the chimney is you got all these interlocking stones that are then, there's variations in color of those stones. And so you have some light stones that are in shadow, you get light stones that are in light, you get dark stones that are in light and dark stones that are in shadow. and I need to figure out, oh, how do I want to represent all those? I want to make sure that the main structure of that chimney is functioning properly. So I'm going to work that background. With these kind of circular marks, kind of moving in and out up to that edge. And kind of create a bit of a jagged edge along in here. And I think just enough of a suggestion of those stones rather than really getting into each and every one of those is sufficient. I start to suggest some of the finer lines. It gets darker right on that roof line right up in here. And be careful of creating rhythmic marks in this section. You know, evenly spaced marks here. That's like those stones are all irregular. So make marks that are also irregular. And I think what I need, actually, I need a little bit more depth in that background here. I'm just masking the edge of that roof line. See how that reads. It's darker back in there, but that brings a little bit more definition to that roof line. Now with this overhang, they're slanting back. That's actually aligned with this plane here. So this is where I can start to indicate that. So I'm trying to be aware of both this path along here as well as the angles that would reinforce the depth. So just kind of little tick marks as I follow along that path, followed by these diagonal marks that help to reinforce the perspective of that overhang. And then that corner gets kind of obscured, so I'm not going to invent something there. I feel like that's functioning sufficiently. Now I do want to bring that corner forward somehow. What do I want to do there? What do I want to do? Well, actually, I need to. There's that little dark spot. Sometimes it's the little things that can make a big difference. So I need to get rid of that. And I need to really bring this corner up to that edge. Like that. There we go. That's working a bit better. Mad moments go say it does look like snow on the roof right now. So we're hopefully going to address that in a little bit. All right, so I think we can get to the texture on the roof now. I'm going to stay with that 2B. So this is another area where you can take the precision however you want to go. Since I'm running fairly short on time, I'm going to have to use the power of suggestion for this rather than really calculate out each of these shingles. But if you've got more time, you may really take the time to map out the number of lines, these roof lines. So I'm going to kind of focus first on these paths that follow along the plane there. And then there's 10 or so. So I just want to get a sense for the scale of these marks and create just subtle lines that indicate that. I don't want them to be, strong lines that really divide up that roof. That would be kind of far too precise. And again, I don't want to disrupt the overall perspective and the form of the roof. So if I become too precise, then and add too much detail to the roof, those details could pop off the surface there. So what I'm looking for is an overall sense of that perspective to see if those lines as a cumulative support the perspective of the roof. And then what you see is because of the angles, the changing angles here, the lines here are closer together optically. So again, there's the difference between the optical truth and the literal truth. And we sometimes fight those two because ultimately what's important to the mind is the literal truth. So your brain takes the optical information and it converts it into whatever is most useful. And generally what's most useful is the literal, understanding the literal truth of a structure. The idea that these two lines are parallel, for example. And so we understand that literally they're parallel, but optically, because of the rules of perspective, they form different angles. So I'm thinking, again, what I'm evaluating now is as I draw these lines is, do they accumulate together to create an understanding of that change in perspective? And then as I look at the information on these shingles, what I see is defining the ones that really are popping off are these kind of thin triangles. So there are these lines that run down and are consistent with the perspective of the lines moving up like this. And then there's some of those shingles that pop off, create these kind of triangular forms. So they, in those shadow areas. So I'm trying to define the angle of that perspective. Making a little bit thicker on the right side, and that will hopefully help to suggest the shadow being cast by each of those shingles that are popping off. And roughly thinking about where those are, but again, I don't want to get too kind of persnickety. And I'm intentionally kind of moving around because I'm trying to build up the whole thing at once. If I get locked onto the details in one area and then move to the next and move to the next, what I've found is that I very rarely tie them together effectively when I do that. So I'm forcing myself to jump around from spot to spot, making quick observations and trying to be more concerned with staying consistent with perspective, make sure that it's reinforcing that plane, then is accurate and is 100% accurate with the reference photo, or that the shingles are lining up. And I think about that, the fact that when I first encountered this subject, I was aware of those shingles that are kind of peeling off the top there, but I'm not counting each one. I'm not effectively mapping each of those. I'm just kind of taking it all in. And so I want my drawing to kind of reflect that, again, that thought of taking it all in. And then you find that the side of the pencil does a really good job of suggesting detail. So if you're struggling with this part, try utilizing the side of the pencil versus the tip. It tends to create more kind of naturally formed marks. Bounce over here. And also, in thinking about the change in angle from left to right, and as I make these marks, trying to make it so that they're consistent with that progress from left to right. This would be a really cool subject to paint, but all right. And now as I move to this section of the roof here, just like we're observing that those these lines here, these horizontal lines, kind of get squished because of the perspective. The angles here, the lines that kind of move up the slope of the roof, also change. So we're really kind of focusing on the abstract quality of the marks here to reinforce that perspective. So things get really squished on this roof because we're kind of shearing across that slope a bit more. And if you find yourself kind of getting hung up on one area, just kind of force yourself to move to another, really bounce around the roof there so you don't get hung up. Just use that power of suggestion. Use the abstract quality of the marks to do that. And then you'll find that balance of what's acceptable to you in terms of accuracy. And you kind of put yourself in the shoes of the viewer and ask yourself, if I were to encounter this drawing, is there anything that would be distractingly off? That needs to be adjusted so that it becomes less distracting. But when we think about it, when we encounter a subject, our brain does all this calculation for us. We don't stop to really think, well, how do we know that this is a cabin that's made out of this old wood, and what are all the visual cues that we're taking in and processing? Our brain calculates all that and then sends the signal to our conscious mind that this is an old house, old cabin there. And so we're kind of reverse engineering that process a bit, and really kind of embracing the whole visual process and letting our drawing kind of reflect that reflect that process. Let our conscious mind or subconscious mind process the visual information of the drawing in the same way that it would when we're encountering the real subject. Okay, so something seems off on this. So I want to double check this angle here. And then, okay. Bring that corner out a little bit more. I kind of had lost the slope there. So just using the eraser now, I'm going to sharpen up some of these edges. And then this one right here seems a little bit blurred at the end. So much information gets carried in the corners of things. You'll find that often if you get the corners right, the brain kind of fills in the missing information, and the missing information between them. So just using a really light pressure with this eraser more to blend than anything, to kind of unify these marks. So again, I'm looking for that overall kind of cumulative understanding of the roof. And then I might need to I guess now that everything kind of feels generally been brought up to the same level. So now I need to figure out where I need to provide a little bit more emphasis. Maria is saying, I saved the broken ends of my charcoal pencils, about 1/2 inch long, and I'm using them on the side to texture the roof shingles. That's awesome. It's a really kind of good experimentation with the forms or with the objects there. So, all right, now I'm going to switch to the 4B. And I think what I want to do is I want to start from this corner. If anything, bring that corner out by sharpening up right in here. Kind of suggesting some of those lines in there. I think I need to add a little bit of depth to the door here. So go a little bit darker in here. And I think I can add a little bit of depth to some of these lines. Actually, I think, yeah, these posts seem a little bit weak. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time around those edges. Add a little bit more structure to them. Just kind of sharpening those edges to see if they pop forward a little bit more. I think that helps a little bit. And as I come down here, I bring in a line to define that edge just a touch. It gets a little bit darker. There we go. That line that cuts behind there, that helps to define the edge of that post to bring that forward. And then I can add a little bit more structure to this one here. I'm going to mask that. And actually I'm going to use my kneaded eraser. I haven't really used this much at all. This is the first time I used it. But just kind of lift off a little bit from here. And then over on this side as well. The kneaded eraser is just effective because it's really nice and soft. So you can kind of create some gradations a little bit more effectively. And back to this. And so I want to just be delicate with those vertical posts because I don't want those to feel like they're just kind of pasted on there, just going to jump off the page. So being really selective about where to sharpen and where to add more kind of definition along that edge. Again, to try to find that balance between variety and unity. And I'm going to darken up along in here. And that just brings a bit more form to these logs here. Ooh, that horrible sound of the charcoal. Let's see. I think this is really a key point that can be darkened. And there's something around this area here feels less resolved, so I just need to give it a little bit more attention. little square windows there, those air vents need to be defined. And then I think I do need to bring a little bit more emphasis along that edge here. So in just really subtle ways, just adding a little bit of sharpness, and you'll find that sometimes just being selective of where you add the detail is sufficient for the viewer's mind then to fill in that missing information. So you find that, you know, just a few kind of thought out areas where you've brought everything up to a high level of render is enough to make the whole drawing feel like it's finished, it's detailed. And when you think about how we actually observe things, we're only seeing a small portion of the subject in focus at any given time. So it can sometimes feel artificial to have an entire drawing that's in sharp focus. When you think only about 1% of our field of vision is ever in focus at any given moment, we're really used to piecing together information in our mind. So taking things that are out of focus and subtle and making sense out of it all. So all right, so this back corner still needs to be resolved to some degree. And what I'm observing now is that there's this basic relationship between light and dark, where it's light in the background, this becomes darker. But as we move up, you see this dark band of shadow in the trees, where that's actually darker than the wood here. So what I'm gonna do is darken that up to that edge. And then we'll see how that plays out. And then as we come down here, I think just in a few key areas, we can define that edge to provide some sort of structure there. All right, so how's everybody doing? I think we're pretty much nearing the end of this drawing. If you've been following along, or if you're watching as a recording and drawing along after the fact, again, you'll find the link to the show page on Artist Network where you can share your drawings for this. So you'll find all the other past episodes there. So this is episode 92, I believe. So we've really been going for a long time. And I've heard from some of you that have done every single drawing, which is really cool. It is quite an honor to hear that that some of you have been really using this as a way to boost your drawing skills. So that's what this is all about, this show. Oh no, looks like the camera quit on me. I think, yeah, it's been a long drawing, so it does not like it. There we go. Yeah, it looks like it's drained, so we'll call it a day. I think you can see everything here. If it cuts out on me again, it is what it is. I think we made it to the end, so I'm very happy with that. I might kind of keep working on this. If I do, then I'll post the final one on Artist Network. So I want to thank you all for being with me today. Next week we are working on the landscape of this country road. Some of you had asked about drawing trees, and so this has it's a giant tree as a main focal point. So it's a country road, but it's the tree that really becomes the star of this thing. So it was a cool photo just taken on the street here where I live in Colorado. So I hope you join me there. You'll actually find on Artist Network, you'll find a link to that if you want to see the image. So again, thank you all for joining me. I hope this has been helpful for you in some way. I know it is for me. As always, this is what this is all about. It's about getting together to draw so that we can improve our skills and hopefully translate it to some of the other art forms that we practice. I do feel better about this version than the preparatory ones. That's always a good thing. But again, I want to thank you all. We meet every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. Tell your friends. Some of you all get together before or after to draw, which is really cool. So again, if I missed any questions, I apologize. I've been trying to monitor the thread, but it doesn't look like there's been that many questions coming through. So I think we're going to be all set with that. But if I did miss anything, I'll hang on for just a few more minutes to try to answer those for you. Otherwise, we will see you all next week. Have a fantastic weekend.